Please welcome to the stage Kevin Ryan and Dwight Merriman, the co-founders behind Gilt, Business Insider, and 10gen. Thanks for coming. I'm really excited to talk to both of you. This is actually, you've known each other since 1996, founded and built 5 companies together, but this is the first time you've been on stage interviewed together.
Yep.
Before we get into the companies that you've built, how did you guys first meet?
So Dwight and Kevin O'Connor had founded Doubleclick, and I had an idea that was somewhat similar to that. I went to meet Doubleclick to find out the competition at that time. These 2 guys were incredibly impressive, and so they convinced me to join them. They had about 15 employees at the time, and then so I became CFO for a little bit, president, and then CEO. So Dwight and I worked for 9 years together at Doubleclick.
How did you transition from being work colleagues to then now co-founders? I mean, you've founded 5 companies together, some of them worth billion plus dollars.
Hopefully.
It's one of the most successful duos of founders in the tech world right now. How did you know that you would be able to work together?
Well, we worked together at Doubleclick for over 9 years. So by the end of that period, it was very clear, just empirically, that we worked well together, we got along, and all of those sort of things. And then, so when we sold the company, we were both available, both in New York at that time, both interested in doing entrepreneurial things. So it was very natural just to get going then.
What was the first company?
So we started actually 2 companies at the same time, ShopWiki and Panther Express. Were actually 2 of the companies that we sold. So actually out of the 5 that we started, those are probably 2 of the least successful. So we apparently weren't very good at it the first time out.
So then how did you know at that point that Dwight was the right guy to then start the next company with? Like what's the dynamic between the 2 of you?
So that's much easier because what really makes this work is that, so 1, long-standing relationship. 2 is we're incredibly complementary. So, Dwight still generally codes 3 or 4 hours a day, and I think that it's always hard to tell, but I think there's probably no one better, in New York, possibly in the country, at having a technical vision, implementing it with a great business mind on top of that. And so then on my side, I tend to focus on all the non-technical aspects. So, hiring, firing, HR, sales, business.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah. And so
money.
It means that I have total faith in what Dwight is doing and decisions he's making, and hopefully he has faith in what I'm doing. And so we were saying the other day that we've both been married to our spouses for a long time, and you have little disputes and things, and we have never in 16 years had a dispute.
So you've founded and built 5 companies, some have gone through some troubling times, but never once, no fights.
No fights.
No mediators.
No.
But it's worked very well. I think it's like, just to repeat you a little bit, it's different skills, they're complementary. And then in addition to that, we tend to be kind of philosophically aligned, like when there's strategic decisions to be made. It's that combination works really well.
So you've been in advertising with Doubleclick, e-commerce with Gilt, media and publishing with Business Insider, now enterprise databases with 10gen and MongoDB. How do you know what that next idea is? I mean, you've switched across pretty much every sector in the technology world. Take me through the framework that you go through when you're founding and building a company.
I think every journalist would like us to have a framework, and we don't have a framework at all. In fact, we do some things that I don't recommend for people, which is, for example, when we sold Doubleclick, we were arguably 2 of the most knowledgeable people about the ad technology space in the world. And the one thing we were set on is that we were never going to do ad technology again, only because we were just bored of it. I had done 9 years of it. I'd been on 4,700 ad sales calls and just didn't want to do anymore. So we solved for 2 things: business ideas that we thought were could be great ideas and could work, and 2 things we just found interesting and fun. So that meant, and again, I don't recommend this, that often we go into things that we know nothing about. In fact, we generally go into things that we know nothing about.
Yeah, I think if you're an entrepreneur, what you look for is you look for a problem that needs solving, and at this point in time, and then you try to solve it. And that problem may not be in an area that's, say, a hobby for you. And you need to be able to bring something to the problem, right? Like, so for example, on some of these, like, okay, we don't know anything about advertising, but we do know a lot about software and technology. So we have half of the skills you need to go do internet advertising infrastructure. So that's a pretty good start. And then you try to build a team and go from there. So that's really what's happened with all of these. It's just we see, you could call it a problem that needs solved or an opportunity. And then you have some things to bring to that. And then the other things, you go hire the best people you can find who know those things. You know, so we hire the best people we could find who knew a lot about e-commerce and knew a lot about fashion. And then we felt like we knew a lot about internet technology, internet marketing, and just building startups.
So what you're saying is there's really no pattern recognition.
No.
It's just about solving problems.
And I think that's one of the dangers for like a first-time entrepreneur is homing in too much on an idea that's your personal hobby. Because there's a little bit of a trap there, is that you've got a little bit of a selection bias there because you like whatever it is, so you start working on a company in that space. If you're doing a startup and the idea is about something that wasn't a hobby of yours, that's actually a sign maybe it's a good idea.
Yeah, we both like wine and have never discussed having a wine website in any way, just because don't see the good business idea, even though it would be kind of a passion for us.
I want to talk about the problems that Gilt is solving. What was that problem that Gilt solved, and is it still solving that problem?
Yeah, actually, oddly enough, it's one of the few cases that the business we have today is identical in some ways, strategically, to the business we had the first day we started. In other words, you know, I knew this model had worked in France. It's the first time we saw a model somewhere else, and it was remarkably successful there, and I just couldn't figure out why that would be doing $1 billion a year in France, and no one was doing it in the United States. So right away, we were 50% of the way there. Secondly, I just walk down the street and see, you know, 100 mostly women in line, passionately waiting for a Marc Jacobs sample sale, and had, you know, left their office, lied to their boss, gotten in line for this. And I thought, wait a second, it'd be so much easier. I can see if they could just sit there at their desk and solve that problem, which is both a problem for Marc Jacobs, because it's cheaper to just do this online. It's much better for the consumer, and I thought it'd be a huge business. And the business is so enormous. I mean, the broad business is just, you know, can you buy great fashion at a lower price? TJ Maxx does $20 billion, QVC does $10 billion. You know, it's like a $100 billion sector. And so it had to go online, and none of them were doing it online.
I mean, there's some things that it hasn't worked. You know, like you went into food with taste. That didn't seem to work. You know, clothing, you've been successful in. You know, you just sold Jet Setter. And you know, how do you decide what works and what doesn't work? Is it just trying things out on that e-commerce platform with that flash sales model? Yeah,
you want to keep, it's one of the things we do very well is make sure that we are the leader in the sector. And so the one thing I'd say for the companies we've started, either are already or will become the leading player in the sector. And in the internet, even being number 2 sometimes can be a dangerous place. We saw it at Doubleclick that the number 2 player was often worth at various points, you know, 1/6 or 1/10 of our value. So moving very quickly, being very aggressive early on, establishing a brand and getting critical mass is extraordinarily important, which means that we generally raise more money and hire more people to be the winner. In Gilt, we did that. I think that's worked very well. We'll have some things that are different stories. So taste never turned out to be that big. It's a great looking product, but not big enough for us to really expand. Jet Setter did work very well, so the product has been very successful, but I think we don't have enough traffic to take it to the next level. And one of the things I think we probably have done a good job on various points is being sort of cold-hearted, not falling in love with things and saying, look, we built a lot of value to here, but let's sell it. I mean, ShopWiki, we built up a company, made money on it, sold it, because it was not worth the time we could spend on our other businesses. So having more businesses makes you a little more objective.
Right. Gilt, last year you guys, Gilt did around $600 million in gross sales. You hit your first month of profitability.
Quarter, yeah.
Quarter of profitability. Is Gilt a public company? Like, are we going to see Gilt as a public company in the next year or two?
So nothing's really changed, which is two things. One, that we have not started in any process whatsoever to go public. Haven't even had a meeting about it. On the other hand, what I've always said is that it's still true that I think, Gilt is a public company at some point. No rush. I mean, every day you wake up and think this could go public now. It's plenty big enough. It's probably 4 times larger than Doubleclick when we took it public. So we can go public. The question is the right time? Do you want to have those quarterly earnings pressure? I ran a public company for 7 years. I don't wake up every day and think, God, it'd be so great to be public. That's just so fun. I miss all the institutional investors.
What did you learn from Doubleclick that you would apply to your companies now when it comes to the public?
That when your stock goes from 130 to 5, it's not very fun. People don't like. Turns out people don't like that.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of it's out of your control, and in some ways, there's nothing to learn. You, long term, if you have the best business, you'll be the most valuable and do well. But it's painful getting there, and your investors come in for 3 months and come out and don't know a lot. So that part's hard.
Yeah, people ask about like IPOs and stuff a lot, but I think in reality, you really just need to build a great business, a defensible business, a profitable business that's growing, and that's your goal. And if that happens, everything else follows along. Now, you need to raise capital at the right times along the way, but I think sometimes an IPO is a way to raise operating capital, but sometimes it's not. So I guess what I'm saying is just we don't spend a lot of time thinking about those things. We don't spend a disproportionate amount of time.
At some point, you need liquidity, and at some point, having currency and from acquisitions, both on the international side and investor side, would be helpful. And then there are downsides too. So certainly, since we haven't had the first meeting about this, it's not happening, in the next 9 to 12 months. Sometime in the years after that, there's a good chance it happens.
So I want to switch to Business Insider. Growing really fast, just took an investment from Amazon's Jeff Bezos. What was your thinking behind founding or partnering with Henry Blodgett a few years ago when you started that business?
So that one was more, I thought there wasn't the publication that I wanted to read. So that's step number one. Step number two is we like to make sure that there's some fundamental trend that's going to back us up, an obvious trend, but that we can count on for the next 5 to 10 years. Because when we start companies, we go with the assumption that we may be owning them 10, 15 years later. We're not easy flippers.
Right.
So the trend, which everyone knows here is obvious, but it still has grown in the last 5 years of online to, or offline to online, is happening. And so then it's just a talented team. And so then went out and started trying to find the right person to run it. Since neither Dwight and I can write and not very talented in that, we need to find someone who could really run it. So I went out and talked to a lot of people who were at Business Week, Forbes, Fortune. I couldn't find the right person. And then Henry was sort of an unusual choice because he wasn't technically a journalist. And it was one of those hires that you make where you think there's a chance this will go horribly wrong. And everyone will say, what are you talking about? He's not a journalist. Or it'll be utterly brilliant because he'll bring an innovative approach, which is exactly what he's done. And he's been a journalist now longer than a financial analyst. He's incredibly good.
Yeah. Just back at that time when we started that, there was just this cap. Like there was just this certain categories about new media and things like that where there wasn't good coverage and not good new media coverage in the sense of online and so forth.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier about knowing when to give up or knowing when to sell, knowing when to pivot. A lot of your companies have done that. You have gone through those periods, whether that be with 10gen or ShopWiki. When do you know, how do you know whether to pivot or sell or just give up? What's the thinking behind that?
I think, it's very hard to do a startup and be successful. So, it's a tough problem. So chances are there's going to be trouble along the way. So at some point, if it's going terribly, it will be totally clear that it's going terribly. And then, you'll be thinking about this, what do I do? Do we pivot? Is there other things we can do? I think, so I feel like that will be pretty self-evident to the founder or the person running the startup. I think the key, though, is can you detect the need to pivot sooner than then, right? Because I think a lot of times people, they do it, but they do it 6 months too late, right? And now you're getting low on capital, you did the pivot, you're running out of runway. Whereas if you did it earlier, it would have been less obvious that it was a good idea, but you would have a lot more time then to execute on it. And I think that's the key, is to kind of think about, should we do it now, not 6 months from now?
And I do think that's one thing that we've probably gotten better at over time, is just with more experience. I think when you're a first-time entrepreneur, you just don't want to admit that your original idea isn't working that well.
Right.
And so you hold on, and I have conversations with many people about this. They're just waiting too long. And so you can't spend 4 years on a business and then end up with nothing, mostly because of the cost of the time. And so you've just got to, make your decision earlier. And it is a tough one, but you just have to be pretty objective about it. But there's no brilliant way of knowing.
So I talked to Chamath earlier about doing things unconventionally. And I would say that both of you have done some things that are unconventional. Instead of joining a VC firm after Doubleclick or after Gilt or after some of these wins that you've had, you just continue to build companies. You have this sort of studio model where you build AliCorp, where you build companies.
And we're thinking about it now. We may start more.
I want to talk about that again. But tell us about that decision not to join a VC firm, or not even to create a VC model.
It's almost a non-decision, just because I feel I'm an entrepreneur. That's what I like to do. I like to build things. I think that you are too. I'm also an engineer, so I like to build things more in the physical or metaphorical physical sense too. So that's what I want to do. I don't want to be a VC.
And you'd rather be, because there's now a lot of entrepreneurs that are becoming VCs
Sure.
because they feel like they can help build.
And I think it's great that they are.
But you want to be more hands-on.
Yeah, it's just what do we like to do is the question.
Yeah.
Because if you have been an entrepreneur for a long time, you will have a knowledge base and experience base that would be relevant for the VC side. But it's just, is that what you want to do or not?
And two different ways. Dwight doesn't like managing as much as he likes really building and creating things. So, I'm not sure that VC right away would be the right thing. And for me, I really like, building teams and managing and being much more hands-on. So I think I might get frustrated as a VC. But, I don't know, 5-10 years from now, we could end up doing something like that.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about it, but.
So back to AliCorp. What do you guys? What's the next company? What are you thinking through?
So don't know yet at all, and it's only I hired Michelle as CEO of Gilt about 2 months ago. So just finishing that transition, that's going great. So it frees up a little bit of time on my side. All 3 teams now have full management teams, and they're just doing great. So I could free up a little bit more time than Dwight could right now.
Are there certain areas that you're thinking through that you see an opportunity?
Look, it's so broad, it's not going to be very helpful. But I'm actually looking at education. I'm thinking about healthcare. I'm thinking about financial services. I'm thinking about big areas where I think that, and some e-commerce infrastructure. So big areas. So no conclusions yet. But by September, I think it's entirely possible that there's 1 or more companies that we've started, and that could be different relationships, because I have now a couple different teams that are working with ideas collectively together, and we'll see where that goes. I mean, we don't work for anyone, so it's really just up to us and a passionate idea, then decide to do it.
And this might be an idea for others, not for us, but I think the MongoDB ecosystem is getting so big now. I think there's a lot of opportunities there for people to start some new companies and do some interesting things. Just the database market is so big. It's a $30 billion market, and MongoDB and that NoSQL database, just that all the database technologies are it's the biggest, I think, inflection in those technologies in 25 years. It's just a huge change. So I think there's going to be lots of opportunities there.
Yeah, people don't realize how big the MongoDB infrastructure world is going to be.
So I'll be very busy with MongoDB for a long time.
If you had any parting advice for any entrepreneurs who want to not only create one successful company, but many, what would that be?
Well, create one first, and don't work on 2 things at the same time.
Yeah.
Don't work on 2 things at the same time.
It's generally not a good idea.
No. No,
This is an unusual situation.
I generally dissuade people because sometimes I'll have someone come in who's 27. He's like, I just started this company. It's 4 months old. I think I should start some other ones. And I feel like they're not in a position where they should do that yet. That you earn, if you have a big success, then possibly, and you have at least one partner, then maybe you can do that. But it's a hard thing to do, and we've probably, had some luck along the way, and it's, you don't know. There are many mistakes along the way too. I mean, people you hire, businesses you start. So we have a colossal long list of things that we've done wrong. Luckily, enough things have gone right that we feel pretty good about it. But it's, startups are a humbling experience. It's hard.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Dwight and Kevin.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.